Night in verse 9, chapter 7 of Judges, if you just joined us. So that night the Lord said to him, Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down to the camp. So God knew Gideon was afraid. And he said, okay, instead of just attacking with your 300 men, why don't you go down there and listen to what they're saying? Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp, and the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. And a lot more than 30,000. That's what that phrase means. And their camels were without number, as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. And when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, Behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it so that it fell, and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, This is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian, and all in the camp. If somebody told you that dream, is that how you would have interpreted it?
What other interpretation could you give on that? If that's not an inspired prophecy, I would everything.
It never says that's an inspired prophecy, right? Interpreted that dream. But the point was, what's the point? They're scared of Gideon. Now, this chapter never really explains why, but they are. His reputation has been built. He took on Baal, for goodness sakes, and won. And his reputation has become to the point that the Midianites are afraid of him, such that even this kind of weird, nondescript dream, they immediately realize, well, that's talking about Gideon coming to take us down. And as soon as Gideon heard, in verse 15, the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. So he was afraid. When he was afraid, did God know he was afraid? Yes, he did. When Gideon was afraid and God knew he was afraid, did God change Gideon's mission? No, he didn't. It was still the same mission. Now, that may sound simple to you, but let that soak in for a minute. When God gave Gideon a mission, and Gideon was afraid, and God knew he was afraid, did he change the mission? No. All right, let that soak in. Soak in a little bit. What did he do? What did God do when Gideon was afraid?
He let him go hear the
He did let him hear what other people were thinking, and that's a strong motivation for people. But he did give him a little taste of there's no reason to be afraid. Well, given you to do, you can do, and I'll let you hear a little bit of what everybody's talking about. We do worry about what other people are talking about, don't we? That's part of human nature, is worrying about what other people are talking about. What do we normally, we're worried about other people might be saying what? Something bad about us. That's normally the way we worry about it. And what does that motivate us to do? What? Change. Sometimes it motivates us to change what we're doing or who we are because we're worried what other people say. What else does it do? Causes us to quit because we don't want other people talking bad about us. That's normal motivation. But in Gideon's case, what did he hear?
Encouraged him.
Encouraged him because they were I guess you could say they were talking bad about him, but it was in a good way from his perspective. He found out they were scared. Yeah, has that ever happened to you when you were worried about what other people were talking about, and then you heard it and it actually occurred to you?
Yeah, it could change.
No, Meryl says no.
I don't think
It could
so.
change for the good, or it could change for the bad, you know what I mean?
It could go either way, but it does happen sometimes. You hear what other people say about you and it encourages you to. Does that never happen? Yeah, even Daryl, it just happened to him. Sometimes when you hear other people, what they're saying about you, it encourages you to. Mark.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things too is like you say, this, you know, we hear something bad or we feel distressed, what do we do? Like I said, you quit or you withdraw. What did he do? He told them to go down into the camp. And amongst all of what he's got to go against, he's in the world of all the hard times of what he's got to experience. And he lets them see that even in all of that adversity, he's going to be taken care of.
Yeah, he does. In case you couldn't hear Mark, he says, what God shows Gideon is that even when the odds are against you and you're scared, I'm going to be on your side. And the way he shows him that is by showing him, I'm putting dreams into those people's heads about what's about to happen to them. And I am delivering them to you as an army that's afraid of you and where you are. All right, verse 16. Gideon divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He put trumpets into the hands of all of them and empty jars with torches inside the jars. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me then blow the trumpets also on every side of the camp and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So what are they doing there? They're making a loud noise, making people think there's more than there are. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of middle watch, when they had just set the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. And they held in their left hands the torches and in their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried out, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out and fled. That's the Midianites. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerah, and as far as the border of Abel Mahola Baatah. I don't know where any of those places are, sorry. The men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all of Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. So they came down and made a big racket. They opened up their jars so they could see all these fires, torches around them. And God caused the Midianite army to do what? Fight with each other. And start to flee, and just disarray happening there. And then, in verse 23, the men of Israel were called out. So this is not the 300. This is additional people from all around the hill country to come down upon the army of Midian. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them, as far as Beth Barah and also the Jordan. So he sends messengers to Ephraim, who, the east, who lives in the hill country in the east, and he says, come down and block the retreat, basically. And so that's what they do. And they capture the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. And then they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. So, great victory. There's some some verses throughout the Bible that refer to this great victory. I won't take the time to go there, but let's just show you. Psalm chapter 83, 83rd Psalm, verse 11, verse 9. Do them as you did to Midian, as the sister of Jabin at the river Kishon, where they were destroyed at Endor and became doomed for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zebah. And so, see the next chapter. And let us take possession of ourselves of the pastures of God. So, this is a famous victory to the Israelites, a famous event in their history, and it's referred to in Psalms, referred to in Isaiah, and they usually refer to it by mentioning Oreb and Zeb. I assume the rock of Oreb only got named after he was killed there.
I just mean that
Okay, now we've seen how Gideon was called. We've seen the events that led up to the battle, and God's effort to make sure that He is the one who will get the credit. And now in chapter 8, we see some of the aftermath. So, in chapter 8, verse 1 through 3, the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely. So, right off the bat, what is it they're saying to him?
You didn't call us to go with you.
You didn't call us to go with you, and they're mad because of what? I'm not going to get any credit for this. So right off the bat, so the battle's not even over. The battle's not over yet. In Judges chapter 8, or the war's not over, however you want to think about it, and they are already worried that you only called us after you started, so you're going to get all the credit instead of us, and they're upset about him. About this, they accuse him fiercely, it says. And in verse 2, he says to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer?" That's his family, remember? "God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" And then their anger against him subsided when he said this. So what do you think of Gideon's response?
Very diplomatic.
Appeasing them.
It is very diplomatic. He's appeasing them.
But he still gives the credit to God.
He did.
I think he does, in fact, he said that,
In verse 2 and 3?
Yeah, he said God gave Oreb and Zeb.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I guess that's true. Giving those princes in your hands. Yeah. To me, when I read it, he stops short of really giving the credit to God. I mean, he stops short of saying to them, what should he have said to them, maybe? I'm not being critical of Gideon, obviously, but
Did what God told me to do.
I follow God's instructions. God has given a great victory today. You should be thankful that He allowed you to be part of it. You know. But he is very diplomatic, but you're right, Mark. He does give God some credit there in verse 3. All right, verse 4. There is a lot of humility, by the way, in verse 2 and 3. He's definitely not taking credit for himself. He's saying, you guys did more than I ever did. You're much greater than me. He is trying to appease them and smooth out hard feelings, I guess. Then in verse 4, Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over. He and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. What do you recognize about that number?
There's all still there.
They're all still there. They're all still there. So he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for for they're exhausted, and I'm pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. So they got Orb and Zeb, but they're still chasing Zebah and Zalmunna. And the officials of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? What does that mean?
We don't want to share.
Well, they said, you hadn't won yet, dude, and if I give food to your army, I'll be on their bad side, so you need to win the war, and then I'll give you some food. So in verse 7, Gideon said, well then, and the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. That humble appeaser is kind of gone a few verses later, isn't he? So he's angry. He's hangry. From there he went to Penuel and spoke to them the same way, and the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna, who were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. So, going back to our numbers, now we're talking about Neyland Stadium against the DB band, right? And that's the kind of odds. But 120,000 have fallen. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers, east of Nobah and Jogbeha, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled. He pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all of their army into a panic. Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a young man of Succoth. These are the guys that wouldn't give him the bread. And he questioned him, and he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give your men bread, or give bread to your men who are exhausted. And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars with them, and taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he brought down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of that city. And he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? And they answered, as you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. So now they're being quite humble in front of Gideon. And he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. And so he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill him. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid. He was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. And he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camel. So this is, the first part of this chapter, we see this Gideon that is kind of appeasing the men of Manasseh, or Ephraim, and he's a little bit still the person we saw in chapter 6 and 7, a little bit unsure of himself, a little bit humble, a little bit scared. But before chapter 8's over, that's not who we see anymore, is it? And what has happened to Gideon? What's the difference?
Experience victory.
He has seen that God is with him, and he has experienced a victory against all odds, right? And what has that brought about in him? Courage, self-confidence, or confidence in God, confidence that the mission is correct and going to be blessed.
And maybe a little bit of justice, the expectation of God's justice.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when Gideon does this to the men of Succoth, who he whipped with thorns, and the men of Peniel, by the way, that's the place that Jacob fought with an angel. That's where this town is. And they wished he just whipped them with thorns. He killed them all of them. Mark says justice. Was it justice? Was it justified, what he did in those towns?
He feels some righteous indignation against them because I'm sure he feels like they mistreated his army.
They did. They rejected God. And they rejected God. And, as far as we know, it's justified and approved by God. All right, so Gideon has changed quite a bit. He's grown courage, he's grown confidence, he's seen that God is truly on his side. Who else is on his side? You all remember what happens in the Old Testament with these men? What comes upon them to allow them to do these mighty deeds? The Holy Spirit is indwelling him, and he is justified and courageous. In verse 22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. So instead of ruling over you, let me just make a request of you that every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. He's talking about the Midianites who had a habit or a culture of wearing golden earrings. So the Israelites had collected all these earrings up as the spoils of war. And they answered, "We will give them willingly." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in at the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of golden earrings that was requested was 1,700 shekels, which is a lot. Just take it. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah. What's an ephod? Yeah, somebody whispered what the priest wore. That was correct. The high priest wore an ephod, which is like a bit of a vest. The one that's described that Aaron had was a bit of a vest made out of gold. I think of it kind of like a little bit like armor that the priest would put on, and it had jewels in it, and it was the priestly part of the priestly garments. So this word ephod, though, in the Old Testament, I'm not sure what I think of it, because that very definitely is the correct answer. That was called an ephod, was the priest wore. But it also seems to have another meaning in the Old Testament of a statue or something like that. Because just look at that sentence. Gideon made an ephod and put it in his city.
So, a monument.
A monument, a statue, something like that. Yeah. Unfortunately, what's the problem with monuments and statues for the Israelites?
Start worshiping.
They start worshiping them, and that's exactly what happens. Gideon made an ephod of it, put it in his city in Ophrah, and all of Israel whored after it. There's what the English dame says, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So people started worship it. English Standard. What is, anybody get the translation? Prostitute, she says. My little electronic godless stuff here. NIV,
It prostitute.
prostitute. Yeah, but it's not a problem, not a problem, is it? It's just stuff.
In the messages, they were
Seduced
seduced by it.
by it. I'm looking for a Bible.
They don't have it
I guess so. All right, so what do you see in Gideon in the after story here? First, he won't take kingship that they want to put on, which is definitely positive. Who's he giving the credit to? To God, and he says, who should be your ruler? The Lord should be your ruler, and that's exactly how God intended it to be at this time. But the people, you start to see in the book of Judges, and you see more and more as it goes along, how much they long for a king. Then he makes this ephod, whatever that is. Was that a bad thing he did?
No, God didn't tell him.
There's no record of God telling him to do this. He's not supposed to make the priestly garments, so if that's what it is, then not a good thing. If he made a monument or a statue to commemorate an event, I don't know, it seems a little unfortunate, but that it went that way, but that's how it went. Thus, in verse 28, thus Gideon was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise his head again during Gideon's lifetime. The land enjoyed peace for 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon's son of Joash died at a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. So we see the pattern start again there. What can we learn from the story of Gideon? I think the main thing that we should take away today is the importance of giving God the credit. He went, God and Gideon both went a long way toward making sure that in this battle, God would have the credit. It's really important, and it's important in our lives too. Why is it important again? So people will know who God is and will be drawn to Him, so that His salvation can reach the ends of the earth. As the verse denies me. Other thoughts or comments on Gideon? Anybody?
I see a lot of parallels to today with this. You know, one with the aspect of in the camp. First off, with the troops that he was going up against. You know, what they do eventually, they started fighting amongst themselves. You would think they would be all, you know, together and unity, but as time goes on, man is always going to even eat himself.
Yeah.
And it just takes a little bit of God, to be able to turn people to righteousness.
Yeah.
Or to be able to stay firm.
Men without God will eventually turn on themselves.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you see that. The first thing I always thought of was like the French Revolution, where they eventually, you know, they guillotined everybody and the leaders, and then what they did, they started turning on themselves, the leaders from there. And then even even now, you see that in all of the things that are going on in the world today that we live in. You know, they had all this unity of, you know, the riots and everything else over the past several years. What happened now? They're starting to eat each other. They're starting to attack themselves because they don't put their focus where it needs to be.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, you see what God can do with people who are devoted and dedicated to Him. 300 men, He protected all 300 of them through the whole battle, and gave a great victory. Yeah.
It shows how God can use anybody in any walk of life, and that Gideon's human. It's not perfect.
Right.
You know, even though we're like, oh, Gideon, you're such a great hero, but,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Just a regular, well, maybe not a regular guy, but he was just a man when God called him.
mercy. We all need mercy, grace, and we need God.
God called Gideon. He was unsure of himself. He felt inequipped not equipped for the task. God said, "I'll be with you." Gideon tested God, and then finally committed fully to what God's mission was. God's mission never changed the whole time. What He called Gideon to do never changed. It didn't change because Gideon was scared. It didn't change because Gideon was not confident, not courageous. It never changed what He called Gideon to do, and God never wavered. Of course, He was there and given the strength all along, and God deserved and expected the glory and the credit for what happened. All of that is really, really applicable to us. What has God called you for? It doesn't change because you're scared or feel like you're not capable of doing it. And it stays the same. He'll be with you, and He deserves and expects the credit for it. Yeah. Okay. Next week, Sam is going to teach on another judge, Samson. So when you come in next week, sit as close to the front as you can, so Sam can see your smiling face. Thank you. Let's close with a quick prayer. Father in heaven, we give you the glory and the credit for your creation, for our lives, for all that you've done for us. Father, help us to have courage to do the mission and the task that you have set before us. In Jesus' name.